welcome everybody to the talk today on diversity and inclusion. Why is it important and how can brands make a difference? I'm Tim, I'm the CEO of Analytica. We provide influence marketing and advocacy software and really connect brands and influence communities to create industry inspiring content. And today, we're going to talk all about diversity and inclusion, and I'm delighted to be joined by three experts in this area. So first of all, we've got Sally Eaves, CTO and Senior Policy Advisor at the Global Foundation for Cyber Studies and Research. Fields Jackson, founder and CEO at Racing Towards Diversity magazine, and Theodora Lau, founder at Unconventional Ventures. So just before I get the speakers to introduce themselves and talk a bit more about diversity and inclusion, I just want to give you a bit of background. And over the past 12 months, what we've been saying at Analytica is speaking to CMOs, heads of social, employee advocacy, marketing, comms directors. All of them have started talking about diversity and inclusion much more often. It's really on their radar. And from our perspective, we've seen that obviously there's through the research out there, obviously employees want to come to work every day and be their true selves. And I think everyone buys into to the broader rationale for diversity and inclusion. But also, there's been a McKinsey study last year talking about companies with diverse executive teams are more likely to financially outperform less diverse organizations by 25%. And Wall Street's Journal, first corporate diversity ranking report last year said that teams with above average diversity produce a 19% bigger proportion of revenue from innovation. So it really is affecting the bottom line as well as being something which is culturally important. Also earlier on this month, Analytica produced a report on diversity and inclusion where we looked at the size of the online debate, what trends we saw in terms of topics being discussed, and who the expert and influential voices were and how brands were being talked about and associated with a D&I conversation. It was really, really interesting, some of the findings, and we saw that there were 773,000 posts on social in H1 of 2021 on D&I, 302,000 of which were on Twitter, and there were 111,000 conversations around gender diversity and equality on social, and 43,000 posts of those were on Twitter. And on LinkedIn, there were 187,000 followers of the diversity hashtag on that particular channel. So clearly it's a really big topic, and so really excited to get into the details. So I'd like to introduce the speakers, and if you can go one by one and say a bit more about yourselves and also talk about why D&I is so important to you. So if we could start with Theo and then go to Fields and Sally, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Tim, and nice to meet you all again virtually. I'm still waiting for that in-person drinks one day. So my name is Theo. So I am the founder of Unconventional Ventures with my partner in crime, Bradley Limer. What we do a lot is a reflection of what we had witnessed and personally gone through in our corporate lives. We believe that anyone and everyone should have a chance to try and be successful, regardless of where they come from, regardless of who they are, regardless of their socioeconomic backgrounds, education, sexual orientation, ethnicity, age, and gender. That was not what we saw in our corporate lives. Much of it is dependent on your skin color, dependent on your gender, dependent on which zip code you're born into, and we want to try to change that. So we wrote a book recently, Beyond Good, and it's all about how do we think about economy differently. And it's not just about gender inclusivity, it's about how inclusion is not a zero-sum game. And that's something that we strongly believe in. We looked at demographics around aging population around the world. We looked at gig economy workers. We look at women, and we look at how if we can better address the unmet needs of these consumer demographics, we can have actually a stronger, better economy. And that's what we do.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Theo.
Hi, I'm Fields Jackson. I'm the CEO of Racing Toward Diversity magazine. It's an online publication. We've been around about 15 years. We focus on the business case for diversity. Our whole mantra is that if you don't believe in diversity, it doesn't make you a bad person. But if you do believe in diversity, how do we get around thought leaders? How do you build best practices and sort of move forward? So we put out a daily newspaper. It's free. We think of it as almost like the Harvard Business Review for diversity. We have a lot of content coming from all around the world about best practices going forward. My other 9 to 5, I'm an adjunct professor at Shaw University, which is an HBCU. I guest lecture at Chicago State. I just came off a 4-year stint as the executive director of the HBCU Business Deans Roundtable. There's 111 HBCUs, 85 of them have business schools, represents 250,000 students. So we're strong in that area where people say they can't find talent. We're crawling over talent all the time. So that's about what we do, and I'm excited about this conversation. And Tim, I applaud your group for kicking this off.
Thank you very much, Fields.
Fantastic. I love the synergies already. That's brilliant. So everybody, I'm Sally Eaves, delighted to join you all today. I would say probably 3 words would bring together the work I do, which would be technology, impact and education, and how they come together. So by background, I'm a CTO, so now more strategic advisory around emergent tech. I'm also, a bit like Fields there, a professor in emergent technology and also education and culture type themes as well. And I also run a non-for-profit, which is called Aspirational Futures. There's kind of 3 pillars, I would say, for that. One is tech for good. One is STEAM learning, so going beyond STEM and really having that equal value to the arts, like emotional intelligence, empathy, communication skills, etc. And also sustainable social impact at scale. So we build out hubs, we build out learning opportunities, both in person and going back to that soon, which is fantastic, and obviously online as well, to really basically democratize opportunity and break down barriers to access. That's always been a huge driver for me. I think what I'm really delighted about seeing at the moment is some of the conversations we're having today. They're moving from the edge to become mainstream conversations, even things we've seen in the news just in the last, the Olympics in the last 24 hours, conversations that matter, meaningful conversations are becoming part of our everyday. So I'm really excited about that. I'm also a very active researcher as well around diversity and inclusion. And I've got a book all around this subject that comes out in March next year that's all non-for-profit as well. So yeah, really delighted to dive into the conversation today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you to all 3 of you. And it's really interesting there that because you're breaking it down, the D&I conversation, especially for brands. You're talking about financial results, but there's also about employee well-being and just general cultural inclusion. And then there's also how you recruit people into your organization. I'd love to hear more about how you break it down. Each of you, what do you think are the most important factors for brands to tackle?
I'll go first. I think, one of the things we need to make sure that and we talk about that a lot, is not checking the box. It's not a PR campaign. It's not a slogan, right? Slogans are great and wonderful. Look at Pride Month. Everyone painted their logo rainbow, but behind the hood, though, what does it mean, right? What does it mean when it comes to initiatives that you support as a brand? What does it mean when it comes to recruiting policy? All of that, how do you treat your employees? Do you actually treat it the same way that you tell people that the others are supposed to behave? Or all the way down to supplier diversity, right? So it's the entire food chain. And what we talk a lot about is we need to make sure that it's not a zero-sum game. Just because you're focusing on diversity, including more voices in your table, doesn't mean that you are excluding others. I think that's the one thing we need to remember. But make sure that you have it as part of your DNA. It's not just the duty of a diversity officer and say, here you go, I'm done. It's not just about having, here I have one diverse person in my board and you're done. It's more than that.
I'd love to get your thoughts, Sally and Fields.
Absolutely. Shall I come in first? That's great. I love what Theo was saying there, effectively about the ecosystem. So using that sphere of influence, I think that sometimes isn't talked about enough, in terms of the partners that we deal with. I'm seeing that whether we're talking about employees or consumers or partners in the supply chain, there's a change in attention about what people are looking for. You mentioned some research at the top, Tim, about that kind of changing perception and attitudes. And we're seeing some more research there as well. So Gen Z, for example, about walking away from organizations that don't have that brand value match, that alignment. But we're seeing that in other areas as well. So for different demographics, but also from the employee and the partner perspective as well. So I'm seeing measurement as a key area to focus on as well. I sometimes think with social impact areas, we don't treat them in quite the same way in terms of measurement. So we have KPIs for most things, don't we? But we don't have them around some of the impact outcomes. So part of the research I've been doing at the moment is actually building that in and working with some organisations, both from business and the education side of things, to actually build that in so we can be more transparent. And I wrote recently about conscious consumerism, and we need to do that by informing people. So you've got that informed choice, and you can, rate different organisations, see what's happening, have that transparency there. So for me, another thing that can make a difference, and that embedding that Theo was talking about as well, and that's absolutely right. It has to be across all levels of the organisation. But measurement's an area I think isn't focused on maybe enough around that, and also supporting everything we do by education. It doesn't matter if we're talking about kind of tech skills or some of the holistic STEAM skills I was talking about earlier on. That's hugely important when it comes to diversity and inclusion. That emotional intelligence, the empathy, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, I think is hugely important as well. So supporting all these initiatives at every level, every role, making it accessible and embedding it in culture, I think is key at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
To me, if you're serious about diversity, it's measurement. If you're serious. If you're not serious, then you check boxes and put up slogans and take great pictures, but it's measurement. My hat's off to you, Tim, and your team. This is an important discussion, and you ran some numbers on who's actually leading the discussion. I didn't know Theodore or Sally, and I didn't know the other 100 people that were thought leaders. I'm just having a discussion, but you actually ran some numbers and basically told the world, okay, who's serious about this topic? And again, got to meet some really great people, but there was numbers. You just didn't say, okay, this person has a nice base on, there were numbers that were driving this. To me, diversity is numbers. How many people look like you in the organization, whether it's an all black organization, all white, how many people look like you? And again, in order to change that, you've got to bring in numbers. You've got to bring people into the building. One thing to get them in the building, you ladies know, is one thing to keep them. So you can convince people to come to the circus all day long. But again, now get them to come back. That's part of the culture. That's part of now getting people around. And again, what I tell people, diversity is a tough conversation. So people think it's kumbaya. It's not. You're getting different folks from different parts to come in and basically now, think about things. That's what creates that creativity. But it's been my sense that I've gone into places where it's a skill set. Very good diversity folks from the CEO to board, they know how to navigate that tension. You go into a negotiation, and negotiation, it's going to be a tough negotiation. There's people that go into negotiation, and guess what? They come out with, they don't have to be loving each other, but they come out with a deal. There's an objective. So there's people that are very skilled at that. And the companies that I'm starting to see, they're starting to find those people that can now push that whole team forward. Everybody doesn't agree. Offense doesn't agree with defense. But again, the objective is to do this. And the only thing I can do that is by measuring how do we get better every day. So my hat's off to you about the measurement. Okay, there's folks out here that are doing it well. Who is it? Am I throwing a dart, or am I starting to find those folks? So these types of conversations for those that are serious, because if you're not serious, this is, you're not even tuned in on this. This is not something you wouldn't even want to hear. But if you are, how do we get better? And you only get better if I measure that.
I like your point about measurement, because it's hard to see where you are without measurement, and it's hard to hold brands or people accountable without measurement, right? You have to have something to measure against. And Sally, your point on education, the one thing we don't do enough, I feel like, at least on the state side, when it comes to education and DEI, is on returnship. We don't provide enough platforms and programs to bring people back into the workforce, right? You look at what has been happening in the last year and a half, where we have so many women and communities of color that have lost their job. They have not just lost the immediate income opportunities, but they've also lost the long-term financial security. So how do companies actively, intentionally bring these people back? We talk a lot about automation. We talk a lot about future of work and AI and all these glamorous way of of dressing up how the way we work are different, and how 1 in 5 jobs are probably more or gig work. Well, how do you help people transition into it and bring that back into your community? That's also part of DEI. And recently, I think I saw Walmart just announced that they're going to provide free education tuition for their workers and part-time workers. And that's brilliant, because that's the people that you need to help upskill and reskill to bring them back. And that's another way to improve your diversity.
Definitely, I couldn't agree more with that. It's at every different level. So you're absolutely right about the returners, and you're right as well about the pandemic experience and how that's had a disproportionate impact on certain groups as well. I couldn't agree more, Theo. And the other end of that as well is looking at some of the digital divide and kind of data literacy divides that we've got at the moment as well. So taking STEM as an example. So from the UK, it would be kind of like GCSE age, so kind of 14 to 16, then A level, kind of 16 to 18, and then even at university age, for example, there's a drop off in girls taking those subjects, and then even if they do take them, actually they're not applying them in industry, even if you take it at university level. So we've got divides at different levels, like the returners you were saying there, but also at younger ages, and also just challenging assumptions a little bit as well, because we use terms all the time, don't we, like digital native, for example.
Oh, I hate that word.
Yeah, exactly. It just has this assumption that everybody from a certain age, for example, will know exactly what to do, will have the accessibility to access, will have the right kit. But we saw time and time again over the pandemic, and again, tech companies really came up to the plate here to help support a lot of people. But there's an assumption that you'll have a certain phone, or you'll have a level of connectivity, to do home learning and all sorts of different things like that, and that's not always the case. And in fact, there's some research that came out from, I think it was Liverpool University about a month ago, that was really challenging this and showing there's actually real gaps here that we need to attend to as well. So that's what we do with the non-profit, actually, in terms of like looking at gaps at different age groups and different experience levels. But we can't just make an assumption that it's a certain age group or a certain background. This is affecting so many different people. So reskilling, upskilling opportunities, both within organisations, but that outreach to the local community, partnering with education, partnering with local projects is so hugely important. It can make all the difference. We had that horrible contagion with the pandemic. Let's have a contagion of change where we come together and show what we can do, because we've seen an amazing effort around healthcare. I think we can do the same with things like climate and sustainability, but equally around education and around inclusion in its widest forms, as we're talking about today.
So I love how this conversation is going, because it's now become mainstream, hasn't it? You can see it's a bit like CSR, where it used to be the person running CSR, but now marketing are talking about it, like the CEOs are talking about it, the boards are talking about it, the new employees wanting to join the organization are asking about their CSR initiatives. I remember back in the day when I got my first job, I just was grateful to be employed. Now employees that I'm speaking to are saying, what is your CSR initiative? What is your D&I policy? And this has changed into the mainstream, which is amazing, and is obviously driving that. Now, all three of you are seeing the connected vision here, which is wonderful, and obviously a lot of people can learn from you. How do you think we're doing over the past 12 to 18 months? What do you think that we're making really good progress? You talked a bit about some of the technical companies, Sally, who have made some advances, provide some free education. I'd love to come to you, Fields, and ask you whether you think that a lot of progress has been made over the past 12 months, or whether you feel like we're just at the start, and you think that we need to do so much more, much faster.
Progress has been made. And again, it's like anything else with the pandemic. There are states that are doing better. So it's leadership. That's what, to me, it comes down to leadership. There are companies kicking butt. There's companies that, you never read about them in the paper. You never hear this crazy stuff. And there's companies that every day there's something else. So there are folks that are doing, and again, diversity is an ongoing journey. So I don't think it's ever over. But there are people that are, when they've got programs, they know how to execute the program. They get the right people in place. And again, I say it's measurement. Again, what does a championship look like? What does fast look like? You have to be able to. So this guy's fast. Well, what does that mean? Right now, you put a clock on them and you say, okay, that's fast, right? So if I want to get everybody fast, what do we need to do to train those people in that sort of skill set? So there are some people that are. I think there's some people that are doing a terrible job. I don't report about them in my magazine. I don't say anything about it. But there's the people that are doing a great job. we sort of focus on them and say, sort of, these are the best practices. This is what they're doing. These are the folks that they're around. So we sort of love to give examples of what that looks like, at least from our vantage point. So just like anything else, there's people that win championships. There's coaches that never win. I don't think it's I don't think it's just there's certain people in the Super Bowl every year. There's certain people that guess what, you read about all this stuff going on all the time. So I think it's leadership, and I think it starts at the top from board of directors. So again, you're talking about diversity, and if your board is not diverse, it's lip service. It's just lip service. So if I'm a new employee, it's especially these the younger employees. When I come in, I got to see it. I hear what you're saying, but I got to see it. So to answer your question, there's some folks that are doing a phenomenal job, and I think those are the ones that at least you can benchmark going forward.
Great. So it's all about leadership and visibility, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Theo. Just before I come to you, anyone listening, please post any questions in the chat. We'll read them out and get them answered by the panel. So yeah, how do you think we're doing, Theo?
So Theo is the pessimistic hat today. And it's hard. I see progress in terms of awareness, right? We do talk a lot more about it. You see logos changing color almost every month, right? March is Women's History Month, and then you have Black Lives Matter, and then you have Asian hate, and then you have rainbow. You have all kinds of colors coming down. But let's look at numbers, right? We're talking about numbers. So according to World Economic Forum, it would take 268 years to close the gender economic gap. 268 years. We're not talking about me not seeing it. I'm not even talking about my kids will not see it, not even their grandkids. We're talking about great grandkids in here. It's depressing. We have lost an entire generation of progress. We've been working with what's called the Time's Up Care Economy Council in the US that looks at how we can work with different brands and companies and organizations to create a caregiving infrastructure, because that is something that we don't have set up well in the US, and that's something that impacts a lot of people in here. And according to them, women have lost 32 years of progress just in this past year alone. And again, that's like a whole generation. It hurts to know that a lot of these is human induced, right? Economic inequality is a human made problem that can be solved. We can send people to the moon. Why can't we fix, people not getting enough food? We had 70 million Americans who were food insecure this past Christmas. 70 million. It's a huge number for a country that is so wealthy. It is one of the wealthiest in the world. There's no reason why we'll have millions of children who could not participate in virtual learning last year. They lost an entire year. And you keep hearing stories about these, and you can't help but wonder, when we talk about DEI, we focus a lot about including women, including different demographics. But have we stopped and looked, holistically speaking, do we even have the necessary infrastructure to support these programs? Because it's not just about you going out to look for women talent. It's also you need to have the right policy in place. There are lots of women who could not get back to the workforce this year because the childcare cost is unbearable. The US is the only developed nation without a paid care leave, right? So along with that, an aging population, women take a lot of time off just to take care of their parents and the loved ones, to the tune of 7 years. Every woman lose about 7 years of time for unpaid domestic work. Now, let's think about what we can do with 7 years. That would be a bachelor degree, a master's degree, plus 1 full year that we don't have to do anything, just lounge around. Wouldn't that be nice?
It's amazing to hear that the stats behind that. I mean, it makes everyone, I think, sit up and really pay attention. When you actually describe it like that. What's your perspective, Sally, on the progress that we're making?
Absolutely. So I echo a lot of the thoughts so far in the sense of the awareness of positive things first. I think the awareness, like sessions like today, for example, so vital, bringing different voices together, different experiences and sharing that out there. So that's fantastic. I am seeing organisations using that term again, sphere of influence, more actively and being very transparent about that. I think we're seeing a lot more transparent commitments to change, and we're starting to see that measurement that we've talked about a few times today. We're starting to see more progress around that particular area. I think on the challenges, going back to Theo's point about kind of infrastructure, I think that's absolutely critical. So one example of that would be paradoxes that I'm seeing at the moment. And again, some new research is kind of bearing that out as well. So for example, where you have got D&I programs that are in place, not everyone's feeling they're actually benefiting from them. And there are actually gaps in the actualization side of things. So that's an area we need to look at. It's coming down to cultural factors quite a lot, and the lack of education and kind of skills development opportunities. And again, some of those stats that Theo was mentioning there as well, the churn rate. So when you have got a more inclusive workforce, actually certain areas are leaving more than others. So I was looking recently, particularly around the cybersecurity field and also around architecture and testing, and it was almost a double gap between women and men leaving within a 24-month period, even though the research was saying kind of, I love my job over 85%. It was really staggering in terms of that juxtaposition of absolutely loving what you do, but for certain factors feeling you couldn't actually stay there. So a lot of the research that was mentioned just that, I think, is contributing factors to that, should we say. So definitely progress in the right direction. But I think the things we need to look at are all those supporting factors. It's holistic at the end of the day. You can't, it's like the classic silos, isn't it, that we talk about in tech quite a lot. You can't just look at one area. So building a program, for example, it's all those other supplementary factors that work to make a difference, and making sure you're bringing all voices to be heard inside the organisation for that as well. So definitely progress made, but we need to look at it from that point of view. And also, it came up earlier about like focus days that we have throughout the year, which are really, really important, like International Women's Day being one off the top of my head, that are fantastic to, really galvanise attention to particular issues. But one thing I'd love to just kind of say for one second is that it has to be an everyday commitment when we're talking about diversity and inclusion. It isn't something that it's great to get that focus together, but what happens for the other 364 days of the year? So one thing that I'm running non-for-profit is called 365 for that reason, and it's kind of shining a light every day on role models in technology. We interview people from kind of CEO to, I did one recently with a 12-year-old girl who's done this amazing kind of 3D printing project in her kitchen, basically for a local school project to help people out.
Puts
and
us
the
all
whole
to shame.
purpose of that is kind of showing what you can do, and making it relatable, because you need to kind of be able to have a role model that might be the next kind of stage to what you want to do, or if you want to kind of change career, you need to have people from different sectors, I think, different experiences, something for different age groups as well. So that's what we're trying to do by running that particular series. So for me, the other thing to look at is visibility and commitment every single day.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that, because what we're all in consensus about is the awareness is there, but the actualization, the visualization and the commitment, throughout the organization, there's clearly a lot of progress that needs to be made there. I mean, just looking at some of the research around, I think the Boston Consulting Group was saying that in up to 75% of countries, the companies have D&I initiatives, but up to 75% of targeted employees do not feel personal benefits from those programs. So it's obviously not trickling through. And annual spending in the US on D&I programs comes to $8 billion, but 50% of all employees still feel that they're discriminated against. And then there's PwC reports backing that up, that only 16% of corporate directors felt that their company scored excellent for recruiting a diverse workforce. So clearly there's the awareness and the measurement, but it's going to take a bit of time for all the results to really be felt by the employees.
I think it also needs to be intentional to what you're doing too. For example, in financial services, they have been making a huge effort to try to recruit more women in the space, but bringing women in an entry level versus actually putting a woman in charge in the C-suite and putting them in a P&L position are very, very different, right? So don't just hire someone and give them a title of Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Diversity Officer, which is very important, but leave out all the positions for P&L for advancement to this homogeneous group of people that have traditionally been in financial services. I think that needs to change as well.
Yeah, I think that it's really good to bring up a different sector. I mean, what are your views, Fields, on how diversity and inclusion is showing up in different sectors? Do you see that the tech sector are making more progress than finance, or healthcare, manufacturing? What are your thoughts?
Well, I just want to go back to one point you said before. Again, I tend to flip things around. You said 75% of the folks don't. That's great. Who are the 25 that do? So again, that's the goal. I can tell you there's a whole bunch of people that don't and won't. They don't and won't. So talking to them, okay, now what are the 25% that have female leaders? That's who I want to talk to. I've gone into companies where, guess what? The female leaders seem to be happy. I don't think it's by mistake. I don't think it is. So sort of how do you find the folks that are doing it right? And I think the folks that are doing it right sell more products. They got better controls. They've got more things, and they're growing. So if you want to grow, you sort of follow this lead. So it's all over the place, Tim. Each industry. I mean, there's some sectors are struggling more than others. Our goal is that if you're, I believe talent helps things. Talent fixes it. Right? You get the best and brightest, and the best and brightest they're all different shapes, sizes, etc. So the folks that can attract, and then the best and brightest want to work for you. It's not like going into assault. It's not going into a prison camp or something. You're excited about it. You go with your, I don't have to go into a shell to go into this place. And I've been in, and the thing is, what's happened is when you sort of travel around, you see those companies where, man, it's, from the second you walk in, everybody's like snapping. You go into those places where nobody's happy. I've been there. Nobody wants to work there. Nobody's happy here. What's the reason? And I've gone into places, and it could be a restaurant. Doesn't have to be a major. You can go where everybody seems to be, wow, no matter who walks through the door, they treat them the same. You see, I've seen it. And that's part of that leadership that, again, I think that D&I is floating around, and people are like, what is it? It's you sort of sense it. You can kind of see it. So what I would do, because again, there's different industries, but again, find out who is doing it right. Your company helps with that, because right now it's like, oh, how would I even find out? Find out who's doing it right. And again, if you don't want to do it, don't waste everybody's time. Hey, diversity and inclusion is not our objective. We got other things we're working on. And so everybody knows. But if you want to work on this, then now's the tough work. Now I got to lose 20 pounds. It's not just going to happen. You gotta get on that program. There's going to be people that are fighting you. There's going to be people that still want to give you dessert. There's people that still want to do things, but you got to change that. And the only way you change it is by numbers. And then what I do is basically what you can do is you run the numbers, and diversity and inclusion is usually not a focus. It's not a focus. So once I focus on that, even if my diversity is at 5%, somebody's hitting 15%. Somebody's hitting 0. Somebody's bringing that number down, right? And what's going to happen, because you're not focused on diversity, you're going to be surprised at who's at 15%. It's going to shock you. That's not somebody that you even have on your radar. And then you're going to be surprised at the person that tells you over and over and over again, I can't find anybody. I can't find women. I mean, it goes over and over and over again. Now, what do you do to that person that says, I can't find anybody? Do you say, hey, that's great. Either I get you out of here, or I find somebody who can, because this is important to me, right? Or you start to see or you promote the person that, hey, you know what, Tim, I didn't recognize you before, but you know what? It's been brought to my attention. You're at 25%, my man. We're going to have a company focus on how are you doing that? Everybody else is telling me they can't. How are you doing that? And that the company starts to see, okay, guess what? They're serious about this. And that's when I think the changes occur.
Great. I absolutely love that. I love the focus on measurement as well. And so, I'm not as expert as you three in this particular area, but when people talk about measurement, I just see all the stats in terms of how many diverse employees they've got, like in terms of percentage terms. Sally, what other measurements can companies bring in which are like quantifiable that can help drive change?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can share afterwards as well a model around this as well, because that'll probably take a bit too long to go into, but I can share that for anybody who's interested in looking at that in a bit more detail. But kind of with your question, just linking back to what Phil's was saying as well, I think there's an opportunity through measurement as well to help change the narrative a little bit, to really show this is a shared value proposition. So it's that phrase kind of, you can do well by doing good. So you mentioned earlier about, research showing benefits for things like financial performance, for innovation, for things like team satisfaction as well. But there are also metrics, for example, around loyalty and trust. Brands that are more vocal, for example, around social issues, I think it's roughly 3 times more trusted by consumers than those who aren't. Similar thing around talent and recruitment. We talked about retention earlier on. Again, the research I've been involved in, it's roughly 5 times higher employee retention if you're shown to be embedding and investing in these types of metrics. So there's a lot of areas you can bring into. And like I say, one of the things I've been building is this model that's looking at this kind of return on investment in social impact, which goes into kind of the myriads of different things you can look into. But definitely this trust area and looking into HR about recruitment and retention are good areas to look into for sure.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. And I'd love to put all 3 of you on the spot, ask you which brands you think are doing well in this area. I mean, Fields was talking about, let's talk about the, workforce with 25% diversity, and let's shine a spotlight on them. So would love to hear from you, Theo, whether there's 1 or 2 brands that you can think of that are doing well in this area.
Yeah, we actually, in our book, we have over 100 examples of those from around the world, of brands that we think they have done a great job in diversity, inclusion, again, the broadest sense of D&I. And I like to link that to, Sally, you mentioned the point, doing well while doing good. And I like to link that to ESG efforts too, because when we think about ESG, we think a lot about green future, we think a lot about renewable energy, but sustainability can also apply to sustainable business models, which also apply to having a sustainable culture with people to help build that. And so one of our favorite examples is a financial institution called Sunrise Banks. It's in the United States, it's in the middle of the country, in Minnesota, and they have been voted the best B Corp for the 7th consecutive year. That's not something easy to do, especially for a financial institution, thinking about being a certified B Corporation and an FI. And what is amazing about them, we think about, why do we need diversity inclusion? Well, because we need to be able to mirror the communities that we serve, right? You can't just have a homogeneous executive team and expect to serve a homogeneous group of people, or the real world is much more interesting, much richer than that. And so if you look at the makeup of teams in Sunrise Banks, they serve the immigrant community in the Midwest. And so over half, I think 58% of their demographics, the employees, are female. Over 30% are communities of color. Over 30% are people that are living in low to moderate income LMI communities, because those are the people that you need with the lived experience to know what it is that your consumers, your customers will need in return. And so we use that a lot as an example of, it doesn't matter what size of a company you are, Fields, to your point, it doesn't have to be a big conglomerate. Anyone and everyone with the right intention can do that.
Amazing. No, I really love that example. I'd love to hear a few examples from you, Sally, and maybe some of the tech brands that you know that are really performing in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. So off the top of my head, because I'll mention this one first, because I'm literally going to this straight after the call. So I'm involved in it through Saturday as well, actually. So with Vodafone, we're doing an incubation event basically over a day and a half that's connecting mentors within the organisation with 25 different student groups across the world, kind of developing SDG solutions, going back to Theo's point there about the Sustainable Development Goals, and kind of doing guidance around using technology, but also building the tech skills and the mentorship to be able to build projects and learn along the way. So that's more for kind of school age, if you see what I mean, kind of 12 to 16-year-olds, but using that internal talent and using the skills available and the technology available in the organisation solution. So I'm literally going to that next. So I'll mention that one straight away. Another one that definitely springs to mind would be with Ericsson. They've got an amazing program called Connect to Learn. So again, connecting technology to education. Another thing I love there as well is a focus that moves beyond mentorship to sponsorship. I think that's hugely important. You know, we all need mentors. They're incredibly valuable. Same thing with role models. But actually moving beyond that to greater advocacy, calling out for someone else, kind of recommending them, putting them forward. That sponsorship aspect is really, really strong. So I've been really impressed with what I've seen there. And another thing I'm incredibly active with, as we speak as well, is Call for Code. And that's a configuration really of IBM, Linux Foundation, so great collaboration there. The UN, various different organisations coming together and using technology capacity alongside mentorship over a number of months, and becoming really like a 24/7 platform for social good, where you've got always on challenges. One of them is around racial justice, and the one at the moment that I'm working on really actively is around climate change, and I've linked it into a number of schools and university projects as well. So 3 off the top of my head that I'm personally involved in as we speak would be those 3.
Right, I think that's really powerful, and the technology firms, I mean, they can achieve so much scale through their technology that the education, social impact, and sponsorship is a significant way forward. How about you, Fields? Like, what are a couple of brands that?
I wrote a couple down. We track about 600 companies on our website. We have a top 25 public companies that we sort of shift around quarterly, but. HP is our number one, and the reason for HP, they've got one of the most diverse boards in the tech industry. I wrote down Merck, Dell, Deloitte, PwC, and JLL. Just all of a sudden, just started to do some programs that really caught our attention. Just as an example, HP about 2 years ago, we rang the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange with 60 HBCU deans. So I had 60 HBCU schools. And again, a lot of times when we talk about HBCUs, people talk about the same ones over and over and over again. There's 100. So I tell people there's talent all over. But imagine 60 HBCU deans that are teaching these subjects every day on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. It completely changed the discussion, completely changed it. From a board of directors, because people were saying, I can't find diverse board members. So if the dean of Princeton can be on your board, so can the dean of Howard. Just once you get the right people in the room, it just breaks down all these barriers. So again, having those actionable things become really powerful. So that's a quick list. There's others, but there's folks that are doing some things that are moving the needle, and it's impressive to see.
Great, fantastic. Well, that's a really, really powerful example, Fields. And unfortunately, we're coming to the end of time. We've just got 45 minutes slot, but I just wanted to ask each of you in 30 seconds, like, what is the best advice you could give to brands? So maybe if we could start with Sally, go to Fields, and Theo, you could end here. Just what's the best advice that you could give to brands to be more inclusive and diverse going forward?
That's a great question. I think I mentioned the word holistic. I think it brings to mind immediately. So it's connecting your mission, your values, your culture all together, using the assets you've got in terms of technology and your talent, reaching out. So that internal and external knowledge change. People like ourselves, for example, we really want to get involved in this and support you. So I think that internal and external partnership can be so powerful to co-create together. And look at the example of the HPC consortium. It was the biggest kind of collaboration we've had across tech companies, universities, civil society coming together for the pandemic. Look what amazing results came from that through collaboration for change, for a big challenge of our time. We can do the same thing by coming together around DE&I.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Fields, what do you think?
I'd say empower if you're serious. If you're not serious, then just say so. If you're serious, empower your diversity team. Budgets, empower them, bring them into that leadership discussion, have them there at the table, because diversity is talent, it's supplier diversity, it's everything. So again, have that voice in the table, and that voice sort of changes the perspective in the room. So I would say just empower your team if you're serious about it. And again, if you are serious, just like anything else, hey, I want to this list you've created is really empowering. Because again, it's not just what you're doing here, it's your network. Who are you getting advice from? This becomes that outreach where, help me with this. Because again, you can get in that silo because you get in the silo, but now it's these thought leaders that help you do that. And when you're serious, the folks on this list, they're serious folks, right? So if I want to learn, hey, the boss wants to learn how to play golf. Okay, who's my coach? If I walk in with Tiger Woods, people are going to say, well, you know what? I think he's serious. So the folks that you've sort of accumulated on, these are the thought leaders on the planet. Okay. You may not agree with all of them, but you know what? If you're serious to me, then if I'm looking at some of your programs, some of these names you sort of see who's around, you see who pops up, and you see this, well, they must be serious because they've got these folks on the team.
So find the right people, empower them, and broaden your network, and
correct.
and be serious. Theo, how about you? What's the best advice?
All of the above, and plus look inside, right? Find your employees and use them as your brand ambassadors. If you're intentional about inclusion, give them not just a seat at the table, but also give them the mic to speak about it. And also, I think the other thing is, we mentioned a little bit, is about your policy, right? If you do a lot of networking things after hours, what does that mean to people who can't participate because they have caregiving duties or because they have to take care of their families, right? Look at the different policies that you can have to support these people. We talk a lot about hybrid work. We talk a lot about remote work. Well, we'll then end up creating two classes of people where some will be in the office close to the powers to be, and the others who need flexibility being stuck at home, and don't have the same opportunity for advancement, right? So a lot of those things need to be thought through. I don't think policies or culture in a way were set up to discriminate or to exclude people. But if we're not careful about it, we will end up causing more harm. So just think through things and think about what it means by good leadership. That's the one thing that just started to struck me is when you look at corporate America, you look at who's on top, and you look at from a cultural perspective, how do we define good leaders? Do the attributes of good leaders in the US, is that the same as how we would define good leaders in, let's say, South Asia? And I would say it's not the same, right? And we actually talked a little bit about that in our podcast. And will all of those unconscious bias create a not level playing field in corporate leadership? So again, there are many ways to skin the cat, but let's take action one step at a time.
Fantastic. Well, that's an amazing place to finish. So I just wanted to thank everyone for participating. Thank you, Theo. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Fields. I'm in awe of your expertise. You're doing amazing work, and there are a lot of brands that are really doing some great work. There's obviously a lot of progress to be made. If you're a brand and you want to work with Theo, Sally, and Fields, they've got tremendous expertise. Please do get in touch with them. You can find them on LinkedIn and Twitter and a multitude of other social channels. We're going to keep on pushing the spotlight on the D&I conversation, so we'll be doing further reports in future. And I love that you're helping bring the awareness that is mainstream into action, into holistic, connected infrastructure for organizations. So thank you so much for joining this session and for just promoting the conversation and just doing so much good in the world. So thank you from all of us to you, and thanks to everyone who's joined, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.